Okay, this is the H.454 Conference Committee, back in the afternoon of May 28th. And we're continuing our walkthrough of the side-by-side prepared to us by Ledge Council, looking at the differences between the House and Senate versions. And I think we left off in the 30s, although there's not a lot of differences in
You're on page 30, maybe?
yeah, we're up to page 30. Yeah.
I think it's for the call for an additional study.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think I asked about studying things that had already been somewhat decided versus studying new things, and I imagine we can figure that out amongst ourselves unless you have strong feelings about any of it.
What do you mean by that?
The study calls for a contractor to develop a cost factor foundation formula that includes tiered weights for we don't have tiered weights for CTE, but we do have tiered weights already. We have a recommendation from a cost factor contractor on English learners and special education. And so I was curious about the idea of studying something that we've already studied and then delivered recommendations on and incorporated into the bill that's in front of us. And I wondered if your intent was to restudy or if you wanted to study new things.
I think it was partially just have another look at these issues, another look. I think some question about the reliability of what we have so far and wanted to have something a little bit expanded and have a few things added to it. But you'll note that when we talked about the zip code before, there's note in here to take a look at whether that works, and also a detailed explanation of the analysis of the work and recommended weights, and then also the issue about whether it actually costs more for to educate a secondary student than an elementary student.
Okay, but the pieces that I understand that you're studying some new things that I believe we've already received fairly clear recommendations on. And the in the language of the bill, where I think you did not amend it, there's a mandate to sort of recalibrate and recalculate regularly to update.
Yeah,
And so I imagine those recommendations would come through that process anyway.
let's just note this. I think
Yeah.
the
Okay.
need to
Great.
regroup on this.
Okay,
Thanks.
I just don't want to relitigate this issue for the rest of our lives. And then the transition.
Yeah.
I'm really excited. Thanks for doing a transition. We needed a transition.
I was like,
Thank you for a transition. No, and like as it left the house, I was like, gosh, I really hope the Senate does a transition. We didn't have time. I'd also love to hear some of your thinking on this particular transition mechanism. I haven't had a lot of time to get my head around it.
Thanks, Senator Beck.
yeah, so then the thinking was, is that there was going to be changes in between what a district is currently, their current education spending and their educational opportunity payment, which could be either way, above or below. And so there was a concern that, we didn't want to take too much capacity too quickly from any district, nor did we want to add too much capacity too quickly. This wouldn't be able to absorb the money and spend it thoughtfully. And so we settled on a 4-year interim with then a 5th year being the final landing spot. And then we also realized that a lot of our taxpayers would probably appreciate a similar slope. And so we did basically an identical, that their tax rate could, put them on the same scale, up or down, depending on which way they're going. And yeah, so that's what we were just trying to think about the school districts and how they would either deploy new money or figure out how to work with less money over time and trying to be compassionate towards the tax rate payers that are trying to make the same type of adjustment.
Thanks. And talking to Julia about it, who has not done sort of comprehensive numbers on it, but has done some. It sounds like the ups and downs sort of cancel each other out well, which is great. And then the two questions that came up when we were reviewing this in committee. Was that yesterday? It was yesterday. Was one, I think we're all a little wary of transition mechanism. At least I feel very wary of transition mechanisms right now, given that we had one that really didn't work very well recently. And so a flag around, do you think that this gives districts any incentive to spend up between now and the transition time in order to increase that gap? I think there are a lot of disincentives to doing that. And so I just want to flag it. I'm not saying I'm not putting forward sort of an argument against this. It's just a warning sign.
I think it's likely the further out in time that this whole thing starts, the more likely that is.
Mm-hmm. And sort of towards that same end, on a question of sort of like the balance between predictability and exactness, it's not the right word, precision.
Exactitude
is the idea that you're going to recalibrate it every single year rather than picking a base year and just going from there. So I'm wondering about the decision not to pick a base year and just go from there, but rather recalibrate every year.
It's just a policy decision.
Okay.
We landed on recalibration, but
Cool.
yeah.
Okay. Thanks. The Ed Fund Advisory Committee. Pushing it out 2 years. Can you explain your thinking on that?
This may have been a little
this thing doesn't get up and running for.
So the Ed Fund Advisory Committee was part of Act 127.
Yeah.
And the argument that someone brought into our committee room is that there's so much going on in ed finance, we should wait to implement an advisory committee, which strikes me as a little counterintuitive. Though I understand that people have limited time.
And I think it was the tax department who was saying, there's so much going on here
I think that's
to meet.
Yeah.
Have one more meeting we have to do.
Okay.
Easier to give us a year.
Mm-hmm. So maybe a year and not 2 years.
No, 2 years is good.
Okay.
So you all had just one uniform rate, property tax getting over here into 47.
Wait, I want to see what 46 is first.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry.
Oh, that's still the transition? Is that what that is? What's happening in 46?
Supplemental district spending.
Yeah.
Oh, it's long-term membership instead of weighted long-term membership.
Right, just the base, not the base and weights. And is that a difference between the two of us?
It is.
Okay, yeah, so we had that conversation and we, we just kind of landed on that. Once you hit 100% of the EOP, that you received all the weights and assistance you should receive for your unique categories of students. And that beyond that would just be base spending. You wouldn't continue to get weights for all of those people.
Because you're accounting for those costs.
That's right. That's right. And that was our thinking, that we didn't. Well, if your district wanted to spend more, again, supplemental, the base was fair game, but not to pile on even more money because of the weights.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Week 7.
Does.
Yeah. So you all had a uniform rate, right?
Indeed,
We had a statewide homestead and non-homestead rate.
indeed.
But you also have a property tax classification mechanism. So how do you view those as the same but different or?
So the idea is that with the property tax classification system, you have one rate and then you multiply that single rate by a multiplier that's set up in the property tax classification system. Right now, they're all set to 1, meaning they have an equal relationship to each other. And then the single rate would be multiplied based on that class. Right now, there are no policy decisions about any of them being at a different rate. That seemed an important first step. It's important that we actually understand where properties are within the classifications before we begin to set rates or try to raise enough money based on them. But it was a uniform rate that then has different multipliers attached to it. I think that methodology, in addition to allowing us to, in the future, make sure that our property tax system is sensitive to any policy priorities we have, which I think has been a long time desire of many folks, also simplifies our tax system to some degree, because we are, again, having that single rate instead of right now, we have 3 really. And that's, I think, incredibly confusing for school districts to communicate in the future when we have larger districts. I think clear communication is going to be even more important for those districts to be sharing. And as we're moving towards a much more unified statewide system, I think a single rate will be even more important for that. And so that was the goal. I believe the proposal that came to us from the administration also had a single rate, but again, I have some policy jet lag and those are faded memories at this point.
That is true.
Thank you.
We were asked by the tax department to delay this for a year so that they could have time to work through, were these the right divisions and the right numbers? And the big question is, what do you do with multi-use? Apartment up, a store down, and I live in the apartment behind the store. And I rent one out on a short-term rental. And then just the small things like identifying year-round second homes and not so year-round second homes.
So with all due respect to the tax department, we already actually account for both of those scenarios in our homestead, non-homestead system. We have duplexes where one side's a homestead and the other side's a non-homestead. We have properties that are homestead and non-homestead based on how much of the year they're used. And we have they've already drafted 2 reports towards this end. So we do have a very delayed implementation in the House proposal that gives them more than enough time to figure out implementation. And as we have always done, and as the last, many pages of this bill testify to, if they come back to us with desired changes, we can make those.
We were just trying to yield to their comfort level.
Love that.
There was some discomfort with having things named in law at this point in time.
Thank you.
And we were trying to accommodate that while moving us forward to the ability to set different rates. Because under this proposal, we're actually giving up revenue because it's kind of shifted in some towns, but since we did Act 60, we have always taxed non-homestead at a higher rate than homestead.
So my understanding was actually that non-homestead is higher in half the state and lower in the other half.
We knew when we did it,
Yes.
that they would eventually cross paths. I think in at least one of my towns, they crossed 15 years ago. And we are probably at the tipping point I tried to get that discussion going last year and I couldn't get any traction because there were little things like an 18% property tax increase that was kind of impairing vision. So
I think towards the tax department's comfort, I think this bill is uncomfortable for many people. And that's part of what we've all accepted in moving forward with this. It's going to take an enormous amount of effort on the part of the Agency of Education. And I'm sure the tax department can step up as well. Thank you. What's the next? What's this pink stuff? Oh, we're supposed to cross that out. Sorry.
Agenda's gone.
The agenda's gone.
magenta.
I think for us, though, really understanding the complexity of that, what it would actually require for the work, is just something we haven't been able
Yeah.
to do.
Okay.
So there is a fear that could be a huge burden without. So we need to make sure we can actually happen.
Mhm. And, if they come back to us next year and they can't, then we will adjust to that then, but absolutely heard. And maybe we can, we can all look into that and we can share some of the testimony with you, all that we received.
Having them in.
Transition gap on 41 is the same. The next piece?
That's the third transition.
Yep, and I feel like we talked about that. And then we're basically conforming. Next up at page 45.
Property tax credit.
Yeah.
Page 45, not section 45.
Yeah, page 44 and 55.
Yes, sorry, I'm on pages. Sections are hard for me to find in.
This morning we were on sections, so I'm gonna.
Can you, maybe Senator Cummings or Beck, explain, we received a proposal from the administration that we really appreciated the construct of, but we were concerned that too many Vermonters would be paying even more property taxes on the other side of it. And so we did a lot of work to, I know that you used blue and green and we used red and green. So we did everything we could to minimize the red and turn folks to green. And so I'm curious about the changes you made.
We did, Julia probably knows. I don't know how many colored graphs.
I hope she forgot how.
Two section, I mean, there's two competing things here. There's your people on a fixed income whose income may be comfortable, but not wealthy. And is that 110 or is that 120? Is that 90? Whose homes are a lot more expensive than they could afford to buy. And, but there's no place given the housing for them to downsize in many instances, versus wanting to make sure that most of the credit went to the lower brackets. And as we've all seen when we play with income, there are unexpected swatches of white that show up in the blue. Yes. And we landed on this one because I believe it did the most graduated steps down, but put the most concentration of blue in that lower income bracket. Again, there's little unaccountable white areas in every one of the graphs that, the printouts that we look at, but
I really appreciate it. So one of the things I think was great about the administration's proposal is that when you get to the house site cap, you're not kicked out of eligibility for the program, right? Which is one of the real problems with our existing system. And I think we both worked within that, and that's fantastic. One thing that I am concerned about in your proposal, as you were sort of moving the bubble around, is that there is sort of that swath of still folks who are like really, struggling middle class who would be worse off under the proposal. And I think you did that because you were trying to stay within the box of this year's property tax credit. But the amount we've spent on the property tax credit has changed really significantly from year to year because it's something of a mathematical accident, right? It's not, it's not a singular budgetary decision. And so I can pass this around if you want. But the property tax credit, it cost $172 in 2018 and $158 in 2024, 58 millions in 2024. And that wasn't because of any policy changes we necessarily made. It's just because of, how all the other pieces moved.
Taxes.
Yeah, and so.
Last
Yeah.
year and this year
And so I'm concerned we're gonna we're catching ourselves in a trap of our own making that isn't necessary there.
I think we're trying to also work within the box of, I know Senate was trying to craft a bill that the governor would support because he said he won't support either one of our bills. Instead, mostly on the projections that would start out by spending more, and that was just taking the base that we took and said, well, if we were doing it right, which we aren't, according to the numbers, some of us are spending too much and some of us are spending too little. But trying to keep within that box, and it gets difficult to move it forward 3, 4,
So hard.
5 years, even in a stable economy. And I think there's a lot of instability or fear of instability at the moment and not knowing what's coming. And so trying to start perhaps more conservatively.
I just, in thinking about sort of what led us, one of the 3 things that really led us all to be sitting here at this table and have spent the entire session thinking about mostly nothing but this, is the property tax experiences of those folks really in that 50 to 110 range. And I just really, I think it's very important that we structure the box so that those folks aren't worse off on the other side of this. So, I hope we can keep on talking about that construct.
And the thing that didn't get figured in, we just did tax credits. We're in the process of doing some expanded tax credits for the lower income, earned income.
Like the EITC.
Yeah, it's in conference, but there's some nice additional tax credits. The totals, we never had time to work at. I mean, exactly what else are people in those groups receiving that can help with that total household income? Again, we had it for a total of 5 days.
Ways and Means only had it for 5 days too, Senator Cummings.
Fast study.
Okay.
If I,
Yeah.
my understanding, I had, I haven't seen an ed fund outlook for either of these, but my understanding is that the construct in the House is it $45 million more than what we
I
currently?
don't remember that number. We
Okay.
can certainly have Julia come and talk to us about that if
Okay.
when we have the right moment.
Okay, that would be great. If,
Yeah.
if it is there, if there's no mechanism, it just falls to the bottom line and property taxpayers pick it up. But is there a mechanism or revenue stream to pick up the additional cost?
So there's an assumption that we'll be spending, we will be stabilizing how much we're spending or spending less in the
Okay.
future, right? That's part of
Okay.
this whole story of crafting together. There's the idea that possibly second homes could pick it up in the future. And I feel like we've been very implicit about that, but I'll just say it out loud.
Okay.
They certainly are not. I think that some of our constituents might think that taxing second homes is going to save all of us from everything, and it's certainly not going to be that much, but I think it could cover this small difference.
Nothing in here looks at the revenue level,
Yeah.
of not.
Yeah.
It in fact,
And we're also building all of these new homes thanks to, the chip work and 127 and all kinds of other stuff. So that'll increase our grand list.
we'll see.
But is it helpful to see these property tax adjustments through the ages?
Has it consistently gone down? Are we on a downward trajectory? or is
It
fluctuating?
just moves around.
Because, well, tax rates, I mean, they used to go up at, I can remember having knockdown, drag out fights over 5 and 7% increases. They were huge.
Yeah.
Because the norm was 3 to 4.
Mhm.
And then suddenly we were getting 9 and 18. And they're now the new base. And
Yeah.
the hard dollars people are coming up with are hard.
Yeah.
So just another question. One of the issues I have with our current PTC program is that we got a briefing from JFO, and I think you all received the same briefing, is that 60% of the people in the PTC program would be better off if there wasn't a PTC program. In other words, the amount of money they pay extra to
Yeah,
fund it is
yeah.
greater than what they receive in a credit, which I have issues with that. Does your construct make that any better or?
I mean, I think the bubbles in squeezing the balloon, however you want to
Yeah.
talk about it, right?
Whack-a-mole.
What?
Whack-a-mole.
Yes. Oh, you said rock and roll, and I was like, I've never heard that one. I'm so excited. Can really follow that metaphor. I think one of the sort of assumptions that's been making that particularly hard is our constantly changing amount of revenue we need to bring in, right? And so I think that will be somewhat helped by this. I know historically, one of the challenges that folks had with the property tax credit and the income adjustment was that it was separating people from their decision-making to some degree, though I think the folks at this table know that that's not true in terms of like how much people actually pay in taxes. But I think that in moving to the foundation formula, we're going to be moving to much, much more stable revenue needs year after year if all the other income into the ed fund stays the same, which unstable times ahead. And so I think to some degree that will help with the bubble. And the ability to sort of move around those classifications as needed to meet policy goals will also help with that bubble. But I think, our entire tax system is based on the fact that some folks, pay more or less depending.
Right.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to pay for a property tax credit program, obviously.
Or someone has to pay, I think there's a philosophical question, which maybe this is not the time to get into, of whether someone's paying for the property tax credit program or if everyone's paying the property taxes that are appropriate for them to pay. But it sounds like maybe we could have Julia talk about that more later in the day. Conforming. You want them to study it all more?
Well, I think this is, we're at least talking about switching more to an income-based system. And so this is something to take a look at how realistic that is and what
Oh.
working. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
51.
I feel like we've really studied that. But income-based property tax relief, not an income-based property tax system. Thank you. I'm reading better now, Senator
I
Bonner.
didn't think I would have been.
I was very surprised you had put that in, Senator Cummings.
Having done it once is enough.
Four times.
And also look at things we talk about all the time, like that. Made some effort on both sides.
And yeah, I think part of it is people don't realize that that's also a municipal taxes are figured in there. And so if we play with the 47,000 cliff, your municipal taxes will go down, or your municipal income, your taxes will go down, but your municipal tax revenue will go down accordingly.
So I would love to check in with staff,
Yeah.
but my intent, at least when we were drafting, was that we were not touching the municipal circuit breaker.
Right. I don't think we are.
Okay,
That's been a constant,
I just study that here. Okay,
that's the.
So that's the general
that's the
fund.
big flip.
okay. Is that, where in this is that?
What is that?
The municipal circuit breaker, studying that.
It's
Okay,
just been one of those things we keep saying people would like us to look at, but I tried.
Okay.
And it's like many things in this, it sounds simple until you try and do it.
Mhm. Was this a recommendation from the tax department to study this one?
I don't think so. It was,
Okay.
I think it's just something that's been talked about a lot, and so let's really figure out how to make it work.
Okay. I'd love to hear from them on, I know that they felt like the task force study, whatever the other thing was too much for them this year. So I'd love to hear from them. I can check with them offline, or we can have them in. I don't, do you have a preference?
I'm assuming we're going to have them in.
Okay, great. Okay. Sorry, guys, I feel like I'm not giving you much word for over here. Okay,
Always an education.
cool. Bottom of page 53. Bless you.
You know, that's that committee. It's really, as we're thinking about larger districts and how some of them may have schools that have a higher concentration of kids with, and wanted to make sure that the dollars actually in some fashion were going to benefit the kids for whom the dollars were raised.
One of the things we discussed in committee, and I don't think put something in the bill about, but this reminds me of, is a question of sort of intra-district equity. So if we have larger districts, are the schools with the highest need getting the right amount of resources? This reads slightly differently than that to me. This reads more like asking if
ESL.
the weights are being used the way categorical grants would be used.
Well,
But
and it's not even, I think it's not, it's not overly prescriptive. It's just like trying to figure out a way to make sure that the kids in general for whom the weights are intended actually benefit from the weights. And they don't go for something in a different school.
I think that you all and both education committees spent more time talking about sort of what the point of this, like the quality purpose of all of this.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is getting at that, like we're spending the money for what, and is it making a difference? And so I wonder how this approaches that, or whether we need to be thinking about that in a different way.
Right. Rephrase it. I mean, if we have two goals, which is stabilize and even reduce costs,
Mhm.
but not increase them at any significant rate. And to make sure that every child is getting an equal opportunity for education.
Okay.
Which means I think that it's always been a question, if we go to a foundation formula, you really can't use that tax that foundation money or that now weighted money to buy down your tax rate because you don't have an independent tax rate. But making sure that it is going to enhance the programs that the students need and not being diverted to some other issue, like maybe new football uniform or something that isn't.
I see these as assuring that if we believe the money follows the student, make sure the money follows the student.
Right.
Oh, and this is the Ed Fund Advisory Committee that does this. I'm so sorry, I missed that. Great. Okay, I thought it was a separate study from the tax department. Great. I feel like we're inventing a lot of new things this year, and I would rather we minimize the new things we're inventing. We talked about. We talked about page 56. We have all these really lovely removing.
Did we talk about 56 enough? That would be great.
Well, I feel like the point is that we need to talk about property tax classifications in greater depth, and whether or not it moves into a study or not is sort of beside the point. It's whether we're doing it this year or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Study becomes relevant if we're not.
Yes. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Then we have all these non-conforming changes from Kirby, which are totally reasonable.
The miscellaneous tax bill.
And then we have the miscellaneous tax bill. I have one more thing I need to add to the miscellaneous tax bill.
Okay.
That's administrative. Like, it's just like a tiny administrative request. I don't have it in front of me. I just want to say it out loud.
Okay.
It's math. It's not, there's no policy. And I'll find it in my computer at some point and share it with you.
Okay. It's just math.
It was just like a lost detail somewhere. We're back at the beginning.
So we have, Annie confirming that at 4, when we reconvene, we will have the Secretary of State's office as well as legislative council to talk to us about.
That's tomorrow.
Yeah, it's coming in for.
Okay, great. For a better sense of what, yes,
Okay.
get a better sense of what it means to create new voting districts.
And we're going to look at a side by side also.
Yeah.
All right. At 4, because at some point, there is a third party here going home. We should hear from the
We can
administrator.
figure out the right timing for that.
And then I was just taking notes. I think that there was some consensus to have somebody from the tax department come in and talk about studies and capacity.
Yeah, that's
Passive, yeah.
Okay.
Would you coordinate with Annie about who that should be since I'm not the tax department?
Deputy Commissioner Samro. I think she went back. She's been here most of it.
Yes, she's just, she seems to be the spokesperson.
And it goes, when we start at 9, does that sound good to have that happen?
Yes.
Tomorrow morning.
And I have an 11 committee meeting. We aren't meeting at 11 tomorrow, right?
We have the floor.
We have the floor at 10. And then we're meeting at 2 and 4
I think tomorrow we're 9, 2, and 4, or 9 and 2, 2, 4,
9 to, yeah,
depending on floor.
And tomorrow's Thursday.
Yes.
okay.
Tomorrow's Thursday.
Yes,
Yeah.
9 to 4,
9 to,
9 again.
Yes, all day tomorrow.
okay.
Okay.
I'll know, got one committee bill.
Yeah. Are there other pieces we could resolve? We could, we have 15 minutes. Julia could share the bubble with us. That's one option. I wonder if there's something else you all would rather do in the next 15 minutes.
The bubble.
The homestead, but yeah.
Fun.
Yeah.
So if it's
Julia, do you feel prepared to do that?
Yeah, or.
it's
Okay.
actually 10 minutes. Almost.
Would you like me to join you?
Yes.
You would love.
So it's happening right now.
No, that's not on. Adjourn until 4:30.
It's still 4:30.
Thanks,
But you
appreciate it. Guess that's why there's all these house members here now.
Julia Richter, Joint Fiscal Office. What would be helpful? Would you like me to talk through the high level homestead exemption? Show charts, answer questions?
I was imagining the charts of the administration's proposal and the House proposal and then the Senate proposal with the little colored blocks.
Yes, absolutely. Let me just join the Zoom.
Okay. Does that sound good to you?
I'm trying to vision the little colored blocks.
I just looked at them yesterday, I think. You call it the blue wave.
Yes.
I call it the red and green blocks. Glad that we all have such technical terms for the work we're doing.
That's why we have.
So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I will send these. I know we're in a bit of a time crunch. So I'll send these to Annie to post when I'm done. These are consistent with what I presented in House Ways and Means yesterday. I'm Julia Richter, Joint Fiscal. I'm not the business host. All right. So quickly to level set, these are I've compiled in this slide deck sort of the three major proposals, the one out of the administration for the homestead exemption, the one out of the House, and then the one out of the Senate. All of the underlying modeling assumptions are consistent. So those include using FY 2025 data, holding all else equal, assuming the property tax credit is applied in the same year that it is earned. We are also comparing against the estimated FY 25 tax bill, right? So what we're doing is we're looking at what is estimated FY 25 property tax bill of each of the filers under current law, and then what would the estimated bill be under the new proposal, and then comparing the difference. So if it's a decrease, it means with the new proposal, that taxpayer group would experience an average decrease in their tax bill. And if it's an increase, it means that with the new proposal, that taxpayer group would experience an increase in their tax
But
bill.
it is all in today's numbers, today's governance structure, it is not applied to the future state.
That's correct. Yeah, so everything is the
So
same.
everyone doesn't panic.
Yeah,
No.
so this is all using fiscal year 2025 data. It is not making any assumptions about changes in the foundation formula, changes in the future cost of education. It's looking at if in fiscal year 25, there was a change from the property tax credit to the homestead exemption, what would the impact be on different taxpayer groups?
I appreciate you continuing to flag that, Senator Cummings, because this sort of 5 years out exercise is a little wild.
Yes. So all of these slides are in the beginning of the slide deck. I won't walk through them unless that's helpful. The first structure that I have here, do you care which order I go in? Okay. This is the House proposal. So the House proposal would be estimated to cost approximately 45 million more than current law. It's important to note that this is 45 million increase in the homestead exemption. It's not talking about 45 million more coming in property taxes, but rather shifting who is making that up. Because of the iterative nature of property tax credit and homestead exemption modeling, we did not assume that the 45 million was made up in property taxes. 45 million would need to be made up somewhere else if this contract were to hold true. This is the structure of the House proposal. So essentially the way to read this is you've got your household income, right? Generally total total income under one roof by and large. And then the house site exemption on the y-axis. So that's the percentage against the house site. So the primary dwelling in 2 acres. You can see this, the step down.
And I would love to work on the definition of household income next year, if anyone wants to do that with me, Senator Cummings. Okay.
It's been that before. It is a little
Yes, it's certainly not this year.
painful.
Yes.
So this is using household income, which is consistent with current law. And you can see that it phases out at 115,000 of household income. Both proposals have an inflation index included for that household income, so it would be inflation adjusted in the future.
Which is a big improvement from some of the current law.
This is by and large, or this is the estimated average impact, including all of those assumptions, right, that we already spoke about. And we're only looking at households up to 115,000 of household income. So the way to read this chart is here we see the household income in groups and the equalized house site value. So equalized, this is if they were 100% of fair market value. And so essentially, and this is their average change, estimated average change in tax bill. So just picking this one because it's in the top left corner, the way to read this is a household income between 0 and 5,000 and an equalized house site value group of 0 to 50,000 would see on average an increase of $50 in their property tax bill in fiscal year 25, holding all else equal, and assuming that 45 million were to be born elsewhere. The blue, if you can see color, those are representing the decreases in the average tax bill, and the white or unshaded is representing the increases.
I have a really obnoxious question that I don't know if I've ever asked you before.
Okay.
Like what are the property taxes very approximately for like the top left corner of households?
That is not obnoxious because it's.
Oh, thank you. It is right
included
there.
here. So earlier in the slide deck are a couple of summary charts. So up here, on average, it's 0
Okay. So that household would be paying $50 and right now they're paying 0
on average.
on average. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so this includes reference. You can also, a few slides earlier, you can see how many rounded households.
I remember
fit
all
into
this now.
group.
Thank you.
So there would be 40 households in that group.
In the whole state.
Mhm.
I love it here.
In fiscal year 25. It's important to note that we're not looking at the full set of all households. We're only looking at up to 115,000 of household income.
And that's around 60% of households?
I don't want to say a percentage on
Okay.
the record, but
Cool.
more than half
Okay, thank
and
you.
less than 100.
Cool.
I can follow up with the
No,
exact percentage.
That works for me. Thank you. Okay, sorry, back to where you were.
So this is the House proposal. I also want to note that moving forward, when looking at the Senate proposal, it's important to also, while looking at who would see an average increase or decrease, also look at the scale of the average increase or decrease, right? And that's captured within each of the cells. The Senate proposal, so the Senate exemption structure is as such. So similar way to read the chart as the House proposal, but there was the house site value cap added, which essentially means that looking at this first line, the household income of 0 to 10,000, that household may apply the exemption of 99% on the first 425,000 of their house site value. So anything above that is going to be taxed in full. And that corresponds with the blue line here at the top, which corresponds with the right-hand axis. So you can see that the maximum exemption it can be applied against goes from 425 to 400 at 50,000 of household income and phases out at 100,000 household income. And the corresponding slide and this costs the same amount as income sensitivity under current law. And this is the corresponding slide that you see here. That Senate Finance was referring to as the blue wave. And then
So back to probably, do you think of the idea of a blue wave as like a little trigger?
Fine.
We totally had last fall.
Finally, this was the did you want me to walk through the administration's proposal? Okay, this is was the administration's original homestead proposal. So they had the exemption, you can see here in green, with a few steps, and then the maximum exemption in blue here. They don't have the same formatted table, but this is the formatted table from the administration. Our modeling lines up. We aligned our modeling JFO and tax, but essentially what you see here is that the lower income households would see an estimated increase in their property tax bill of the corresponding amount, and the green would see an estimated increase. An estimated decrease. So red is an increase, green is a decrease.
Did this cost the same amount of money?
Yes.
When you modeled the house version, did it take into account, I can't remember what you said about the 45 million extra, was that added into the sort of bottom line property tax rate?
No, that's a good question. So it gets into sort of this iterative nature of modeling where you have the cost of the exemption, and then if you put it in and you recalculate tax rates, then the cost of the exemption changes.
Right.
And with the cost of the exemption changing, then you need to recalculate the tax rates. And so in order to be able to compare all of the proposals, apples to apples to apples, we've just named that these proposals cost different amounts. And so in essence, the House proposal of the additional 45 million would need to be made up by a revenue source other than homestead property taxes in order to maintain these estimated impacts. If it were to be made up in part or in full by homestead property taxes, then the estimated impacts would change.
Yes. And is the 45 million that you quoted, is that starting from zero, or is it 45 in addition to what the cost of today's?
In addition to today's.
So you sort of explained your goals in modeling to get to the particular shape you did. Our goals are really to maximize benefits to folks within the whole frame, to make sure that on the other side of all of this work, folks were better off on their property taxes, right?
Okay.
And given how, there are so many other pieces moving, it felt like the 45 was could shake out in the wash, given the transfers that we're doing right now and how we're expecting costs to go down as we reach scale and all of those things. Thanks.
Thank you.